Great.
What a nice group.
Well
Crystal,
represented.
all right, I'll wait till you give the high sign.
I think perhaps, I know Seth has a schedule to follow, and perhaps we should go ahead and begin, and I'll admit people as they appear.
All right, good. Well, just wanted to thank you all for joining us today for our regularly scheduled MAC meeting. Have a good program today. And also have a special guest. So what I've been trying to do and what we've been trying to accomplish is one, talk about the substantive issues in the industry, and also talk about things that are topical for WTCs. So we're going to have a special presentation from Seth from ARUP in just a moment. But the balance of the agenda is going to include an update on our case studies, as well as an update from PAIR on orbit, as well as general discussions. Did I miss anything? Thank you very much, Crystal. All right. Robin, do you have any comments you'd like to say before we get started?
No. Thank you, Charlie. We're excited for the program.
All right. Well, good. Let me get back to my. All right. So the first presentation or commentary is going to be by Seth Strongin, and he will introduce himself. But he is with ARUP, and ARUP is an internationally recognized engineering and project management firm located around the world, and they're a fascinating company. And there's two sides to this relationship. ARUP really does not know enough about WTCs, and so I thought it was very helpful get large organizations like ARUP to be exposed to World Trade Centers. So they have offices all over the world. I'll let Seth I'll turn it over to you, Seth. I'll let you explain it all.
Oh, thanks so much, Charlie. But you're exactly right. It is. I'm honored to be here, but this is a learning experience for me as well. So I share your vision that this is a two-way street. But thank you so much. I know you have a packed agenda, so I really appreciate you making time for me. As Charlie mentioned, my name is Seth Strongin. I lead the decarbonization services for ARUP for North and South America. I sit in Los Angeles, but as Charlie mentioned, we are a global engineering and planning firm. So we have offices in 35 different countries all around the world. And I'm going to be talking to you a little bit today about building decarbonization. I know that we don't have a ton of time in the agenda, so I'm going to stay at a pretty high level. But I'm not sure if there's time for Q&A in here or not. So I'm just going to run through.
Probably a few minutes.
Okay, perfect. Wonderful. All right. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Let's hope that it doesn't crash everything. Is a presentation screen showing?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Great. So again, my name is Seth Strongin. Thank you so much. And yeah, we're just going to basically be talking about building decarbonization here. So why do we need to decarbonize? There's a lot of science that's been done, a lot of climate science. You may have heard of the IPCC and other international bodies that are looking from a sort of a purely scientific standpoint at what the increased carbon in our atmosphere is doing, and indicating that there are climate change effects. So our temperatures are changing, our precipitation patterns are changing. Perhaps many of you have already started to experience some of these effects in your own home communities. And if you look at the climate science, it's typically forecast at a time span out to about 2050. And the prevailing scientific thought, I am not a climate scientist, by the way, I am a building engineer. So this is going to be really focused in kind of the buildings side, the real estate side of things. I'm just kind of setting the context here that 2050 is really the time horizon. And so if you, like most complex problems, what I try to do is break it down into smaller, more manageable chunks. And if you think about that in terms of time, in terms of decades, here we are in the 2020s, we want to get to the 2050. Really, that means that we need to be halving our emissions at a global scale every decade, right? So if we're at 100% now, we go down to 50%. 50% of that is 25% of the baseline. So we really need to be taking action now, and it needs to be, you know, sort of, we need to be thinking over this long time horizon. In order to reach our goals of staying within 2 degrees centigrade, which according to the climate science is really the sort of tolerable limit that our current society and how our planet is able to deal with extremes. So when we talk about emissions or getting to net zero, what does net zero mean? Well, typically we're talking about, or at least in this context, I'm talking about net zero carbon. And carbon gets into the atmosphere in the form of greenhouse gas emissions. So you've probably heard of GHG emissions. And there's a sort of accounting system that we use for those that divides those into scopes. So scope 1 emissions are those that are directly generated on site. So if you think about something like using natural gas to heat your building, you know, the gas is coming through as gas, and then you're combusting it on site. So that's a scope 1 emission. Scope 2 emissions are where the end use is on site, but the actual emissions are generated off site. So if you think about like purchasing electricity from your local utility, they're generating that at the power plant, you're using it at your building, at your home, whatever it is. Those are scope 2 emissions. Scope 3 emissions are a little bit of a catch-all for everything else, but generally can be thought of as all of the emissions that are not accounted for in scope 1 and 2 that contribute to being able to do your business, being able to, you know, run your shop or service your clients and whatever it is that your particular business is. And so within there, this is all kind of still at a global scale. So within there, we want to think about what are the role that the buildings can play? What is the built environment role? And when we took a look at global emissions, we could see that buildings account for 39%. So you know, more than a third of the total global emissions are coming from buildings and the buildings real estate sector. And so we can break that down even further into building operations, what it takes to kind of keep these things running and your tenants able to use their space. And then also the embodied carbon, the materials that go into building these buildings, and the whole process of being able to develop something, you know, from ground up. It requires a lot of inputs into that process. There is carbon that is associated with most, if not all, of those inputs. And so we can call that embodied carbon. It's a little bit harder to get our heads around, and certainly a bit more challenging to mitigate, but it is nonetheless a source of carbon that buildings are contributing to. And so what we do have, fortunately, are some solutions that are available to us. Again, we have, you know, a need to pretty drastically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, we have a need for our buildings, and we need, you know, for our businesses to be able to run with no interruption, including no interruption from climate change. So there's various measures, and we're going to talk a little bit about this at the very end, that we can take in terms of reducing the overall footprint of carbon that is associated with our buildings. And for those elements that we can't yet mitigate, sometimes with regard to the materials, there are still strategies that we can take to get to a net zero by using offsets and other mechanisms that kind of positively contribute back or reduce greenhouse gas emissions from other sources, maybe that are offsite from your particular project. But again, I do want to put this in some context of time. You know, if we're thinking in terms of developing new buildings, the time to be taking sort of a bold actions is now. So if we take a look here, you know, anybody who's been involved in developing buildings knows that this is a multi-year process from the time that you sort of initiate it until it becomes occupied. And pardon me, and you're actually operating that building. And so any building that we're just kind of starting that process now, or even that's involved in the process but is early on, is basically going to come online in the second half of this decade to 2030. And at that point, we're already now 1 decade into our four decades that we have to get rid of this. And so we need to be planning for buildings now and designing buildings now that are net zero in their operations and as low embodied carbon as possible now, so that we can be having those impacts a few years from now. And if we really are serious about trying to hit 2050 and keep this a livable climate, the time for action, this needs to be happening on projects sort of, we need to really be thinking about this like as we're speaking here. And so what does this journey look like? In the case, we were just talking about developing new buildings. So in the case of new buildings, that starts on from very early on. You'll hear some folks who are pushing for the most ambitious agenda saying, oh, we've already got this net zero thing figured out. We know what to do. And in some cases that's true. And in other cases that's relying on external mechanisms, things like offsets that I just mentioned. But if we really truly want to have buildings that are net zero energy or net zero carbon in operations, it really requires engagement at all stages of the project life cycle. And so that starts from these early planning phases and really, just seeking out entitlements and deciding what project it is that's going to be developed, all the way through occupancy. And you can see in here, I'm not going to, walk you through every step in here, but you can see there's many different places where there's a need for engagement and to really make sure that everyone is working from the same sheet of music. I'll be straightforward with you. If this was easy to do, everyone would be doing it already. So there's a lot of momentum that's going that direction. It is possible for us to get there, but again, it's going to require a little bit of commitment. At this exact moment in time, there are many technologies that are cost competitive and even more cost effective. And certainly if you look at a life cycle of costs, but in other cases, just to be realistic, at this exact moment in time, the market is still maturing and there could be some small price premiums that are associated with that. Maybe they won't even be small initially, but also I would encourage everyone to take a kind of a full accounting perspective. What are the disruptions that you're looking at down the line? If you're an asset holder, and we're going to get to that in just 1 second. What are you looking at down the line if, suddenly we have all these natural disasters and people can't even get into the building that they're leasing space in, or they can't even live comfortably in their home and, feel that they need to find a different place to be. So, it's again, not something that you can just kind of snap your fingers and it's done. At the same time, it's something that we need to make sure that we are focused on. In the case of existing buildings and real estate assets that are already in operation, this is probably the biggest challenge of all, but in my personal opinion, is the most important place for us to be focused, because all you have to do is take a look outside your window right now. Look at that skyline. Most of our buildings are already here. They're already in operation. They're already using energy, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that they're a lost cause, but it does mean that we're going to have to really do some strategic thinking about that. And so that means understanding, first and foremost, is just understanding what is the carbon profile, the carbon footprint of your building or your portfolio of assets in many cases. And then how can we prioritize actions within there? How can we figure out what is going to be the most cost-effective solutions, but also when does it make sense, right? If you're thinking about your a high-rise office building, it's got all of this HVAC equipment and your systems in there. Well, all of those machines have a usable life. After 10, 20, depends on the piece of equipment, after a number of years, those machines need to be replaced. Just by normal wear and tear, just like any machine would need to be repaired. So there's an opportunity when you need to replace equipment to make sure that you're replacing it with a more carbon friendly or carbon free alternative. Additionally, there's going to be regulations coming down the pike. It depends on where you live, but if you are where I am here in California, there's already some regulations on the book. and there's more and more coming, and they're going to affect existing buildings. In some cases, they're affecting the electricity grid. Some cases, we're talking about building codes for new buildings, but increasingly what we're seeing is at least interest, if not implementation, like in New York City of local law 97 of regulations around minimizing carbon in existing buildings. And so it's something for you to keep your eyes on in terms of the policy landscape, but also thinking about how is this going to affect you in the marketplace, when these regulations come on board and you're kind of forced to make changes. So what I'm going to leave you with here is just one kind of last summary of what the key components of building decarbonization are. Again, I appreciate you giving me the time here, and we didn't have time to get really into the weeds of it. But when I think about building decarbonization, I really think about three major components that are all interlocked with each other, and they really all require each other, because you can't achieve net zero carbon with just any one of them or without any of them. So just looking at the diagram here, to me, it all starts in the center with energy efficiency. Whether you're designing a new building or an existing building, the first thing that we need to do is get our loads down, because the second thing that we need to do is make sure that all of our building equipment over time is going to be working off of electricity as its main source of energy. And the reason for that is because because electricity can be produced with carbon-free sources. And so if we can decarbonize our electricity sources, so the grid that your building is connected to, whether that's through on-site renewables, which is great, although not always practical, particularly in an urban setting, or if that is through the utility itself, which is obviously a whole nother domain to talk about. But eventually we can get to a point where the electricity that we're consuming has all been generated from carbon-free sources. And so if our buildings all use electricity, then the energy that powers our buildings can be carbon-free electricity. But in order to do that, we do still need to have lower loads, because that's bringing that much more clean, renewable energy onto the grid and into service, which is not a trivial task. Again, a different conversation for a different day. But with that, I thank you very much. And I think Charlie said that we might have time for a few questions if anybody would like to. Let me see if I can exit out of here.
I think we have about 5 minutes for that, and I'd love to entertain questions. And if we can go ahead, if anyone have questions. I can't see the faces now. Can we minimize the, there we go. Great. Good. If you want to put your hand up or ask a question or so. Well, I'll start. I am not a big fan of being mandated to do stuff, but do you really see the regulation environment being punitive in that direction of forcing people in this direction, Seth?
Well, what we're seeing in the major metropolitan areas is a push in the direction of some type of regulation. Now, you used an interesting adjective there, whether it's really meant to be punitive or not. I think that is an open question. I know that many major metropolitan areas already have local regulations around measuring how much energy your building uses and disclosing that through benchmarking. Sometimes that is coupled with performance requirements around performance improvement. It's my understanding that in most major cities, the sort of penalty system is not overly punitive. In many cases, it's sometimes, I hate to say this, but it's actually cheaper to pay the fines than to take the actions. And I think if I'm really reading between the lines there, I think that's maybe a little bit of an identity crisis of, speaking to your point, Charlie, nobody likes having things forced on them, especially, we're trying to run businesses and, being sort of told by somebody who doesn't know much about your business how you have to run your business is sometimes a hard pill to swallow. And so, I think I think that's reality and realistic. And so at this point, I do think that there is a move towards regulation. I don't think that there is yet a move towards making that so punitive that, you know, everyone should be quaking in their boots. I think it's really trying to kind of be a forcing mechanism, but encouraging people to kind of quote unquote do the right thing in that context. So it'll be interesting to see how it evolves, though, and if that does start to turn into, you know, I would think probably the effectiveness of those regulations will determine whether they start to get a little bit more, you know, strict, and the punishments get a little bit more harsh for those that don't comply.
I ask questions in a kind of an interesting way. Go ahead, Robin.
Yeah, Seth, thank you for the presentation. I had a question, because I would agree with you that incentives is better than trying to penalize. But where do green bonds come in from a financing perspective, and how can that be like an incentive as a more, well, interest rates are going up, so how can that play out where the incentive is in the financing to provide support for making buildings carbon neutral and what have you?
Yeah, I really appreciate that point, Robin. I think that you're spot on, that what we've seen here over the last few years is really a recognition in the financial industry that there's a role to be played there, and perhaps that's going to be more impactful than anything. I think what's kind of interesting is you think about what jurisdiction these authorities might have, and so a city can put in place laws and regulations, or any government entity, if you will. The financial industry, as you all very well know, is the key to all of it. None of this is happening without something to finance it all. And so whether there's sort of the same power of direct penalty and having to pay fines, yeah, needing to get that financing is sort of critical path for any type of development project, or frankly, you know, refurbishment or anything like that. And so I do see a very big role, and already starting to see a very big role of the finance industry. And we're seeing funds like BlackRock, which is obviously the largest in the world, or amongst the largest in the world, who's putting in requirements around ESG, environmental social governance disclosures. And so, yeah, you know what, I would have to hazard a guess that there will be more impact from the sort of private industry driving what is required to obtain the financing, or, you know, to maintain your credit ratings and whatever it is, than through these kind of public policy mechanisms. So I think you're spot on there, Robin.
Thank you, Seth.
Good. Probably time for one more. Yes, Maren.
Thank you, Charlie. Actually, I have two questions. One relating to the existing buildings and one relating to new construction.
Mm-hmm.
The existing buildings, do you think they are economical to convert without any government help? That's the first question. And the second question, regarding new construction, what percentage would a carbon-free building add to the construction cost?
Yeah, great. So I'll answer those in two parts. So for the existing buildings question, I think that it can be cost effective, but it depends on the time horizon that you're looking at. So if you have an existing building right now, and for whatever reason your motivation was that we need to get this retrofit and make this net zero carbon, you know, before the end of the year, I'm just completely making up a timeline, that may indeed not be cost effective. It depends on your building, it depends on the usage, it depends on the equipment you have in there, of course, depends on where your natural climate around you. There's many factors that play into it. But what I would say is to take a look at sort of project at the time scale and the time, the life cycle of the project. And so I mentioned briefly and very quickly that you know, any of the equipment in your building, in your existing building, it does have a useful life to it, and after X number of years, you will need to replace, if you're going to maintain the building, you're going to need to replace that equipment, irrespective of any conversation around carbon. So if you replace your natural gas-fired boiler, which is emitting carbon on site, with electric options that are, you know, maybe more efficient because the technology will be new instead of 10, 20 years old, and you have a carbon-free source of electricity, then that can absolutely be cost effective because you are switching out that equipment anyways. So you're just basically switching one for one. I mean, it's not quite one for one from an engineering standpoint, but you were making that change. You're putting out that capital expense anyways.
Sure.
And so in that sense, it can be cost effective, but that does require looking at it over time. In terms of developing new buildings, in terms of a premium, you know, there's, again, many different factors that play into it. I would say that, you know, at this point in time, it's probably somewhere in the 5 to 10% premium range. Again, many different elements that will play into that. I would also expect that over time, that is going to come down in price. And the premium would come down and become either comparative or even more cost effective. That is making a little bit of a bet that there's going to be technology advancements, and that you know, the sort of invisible hand of the marketplace is going to draw the supply and demand to these, you know, carbon-free technologies that should bring the prices down. I don't need to explain all of those principles to you guys. So you know, it's taken a little bit of a bet on that, but if I had to hazard a guess, within 5 to 10 years, it will be neutral to cost effective on a new build.
Thank you.
But Moore's law doesn't apply. Fair?
Just a comment. The EU taxonomy is driving this from a financial side as well. Initiating incentives on the financial side to really make brown buildings green. So there is an investment opportunity favored and stimulated by the EU authorities at the moment. So that's a key point to Mayham's questions.
Yep, very much agreed. Thank you for bringing up that point. Absolutely driving things globally at this point. Yeah.
And there's some real world instances in Europe with the gas supply and things of that nature. They're really going to be putting this front and center.
I think you're right.
Well, Seth, thank you so much. And
thank you.
Appreciate you. If you'd like to, you're welcome to stay in for the ballot so you can see what's going on and get to know the members a little better.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Per, would you like to give us a little update on Orbit?
Yeah.
If you could, thank you.
I'll do that. Unfortunately, there's some negative update because the process that we have had with them is sort of stopped at the moment. And the reason is the following. As most of you might remember, this is a kind of technology platform that really addresses the sustainability in an IT way. It's like think about it as a kind of Airbnb for commercial buildings. Simply put, with a technology platform. The bad news is basically that the CEO and co-founder of the startup has stepped down, and a new CEO has taken over. The problem is that they expanded too much, too fast, with too big vision for their capital base, and some of the owners have sort of stopped that in order to secure that both the cost of development. They had some 20-25 people developing this platform, and it's quite nice for us because it could sort of make a VTC passport out of it, but they have changed management, reduced their speed. This is basically also because of the complete change of environment over the last 5-6 months. So they need to conserve cash. They need to focus on sort of the immediate near close markets and adjust their business model. So they're sort of going from I think a kind of a subscription-based model to a more usage model, which I think would benefit us a lot. Now, that being the case, we have started the dialogue and sort of keep up the contact with the company. So we will follow them. They are still very interested because the vision of doing what we have discussed is still there, but they need to sort of get their acts together. So what we will follow it up, and we will. I think we will take up the discussion again and maybe bring it back to the MAC in, say, towards year's end to see how they have sort of been able to adjust, whether they've been refinanced, etc., etc. But the product and the potential of the platform is quite interesting, both from a sustainability point of view, but also from a revenue point of view. So it's bad news, sad news, but the hope is it's not out completely. So crossing fingers that we could come back in, say half a year or something.
Thank you very much, Per. We've been working on the case studies, and this initiative started about, we started cogitating on it about it last year, middle of last year, and we've actually made some quite good advancements. Let me indicate to you, let me get my notes together real quickly. The venues that will be analyzing and agreed to participate in Europe, we have Cyprus, Dresden, and Rotterdam. In the APAC region, we have WTC Beijing and Metro Manila. And we also, in the US, we have Portland, Oregon. And in Latin America, we have WTC Montevideo. And we are also trying to seek a couple other participants, and would like to get one or two from Africa, and we're waiting to hear from one other one from the MENA area. I think exposure drafts should be available for these relatively soon. Ed and Crystal and I have been through the work that's been performed by Bruce so far. And it's really hard to get a amount of messaging that we like to get in something that's two plus or minus pages. But I think that the content that we are developing is going to be quite helpful. One, we're trying to tell the story of the WTC in the marketplace. We're also trying to get as many statistics as we can get. So occupancies, we'll have the buildings described, so that's, but then we'll also talk about occupancy and rates, as well as we're focusing on key tenants. See if we can get a list of the tenants so we can illustrate that the quality of our tenants is at a very high level. And so we're trying to get that message communicated. And Ed, if you could chip in and help a little bit and kind of bring this topic home.
Yeah, no problem, Charlie.
The work you've been working with Bruce on this.
Yeah, well, you've described it pretty well there. I mean, just to add to that, one of the things that we've all collectively discussed probably in Max across the years now have been, buying power of the WTCA. So one of the things that we're trying to find out almost through the back door with Bruce's work is the frequency by which World Trade Centers work with, for instance, Otis for elevators or Fane for elevators. Reason being that if we can then, turn up, at Otis's door one day and say, look, we're from the WTCA, you guys service, 248 lifts within our network. We would like you to be involved in an event that the WTCA is doing. They're bound to obviously see that as quite an important opportunity for them. The same may well be the case with air conditioning units and various other facilities management items, and also, like Charlie said, potentially occupiers. So it's learning a little bit more on that through the work that Bruce is doing. It's also trying to find what we call sort of sound bites, sort of bite size quotes and statistics, like the ones that we end up quoting to our members or members of members, such as 321 World Trade Centers in 92 countries, over 72 capital cities. I think it's 90 countries, isn't it? But it's that sort of thing that we can reel off to as many people as we need to, but memorable information that people will know off the top of their heads, and that helps people like Anais, it helps Danica, it helps Valentina, helps Milan when they're out talking to fellow members, trying to reignite quiet members, or out in the network, when Robin's trying to seal the deal on certain things. It's going to help all of our WTCA team, as a quick reference guide to some of our leading best practice buildings.
That's excellent. Crystal, any comments, or did we nail it?
No, you nailed it. I just want to extend our thanks also to the task force from this MAC that helped identify the first round of members. That was a huge help to us. So thank you all.
That's great.
Charlie, I have been through the process with the team, with the consultants, and it's quite detailed and very useful information.
Yeah.
Good. Well, we really appreciate yours. Yours is one of the first ones done, so you get an A+.
I like that.
All right, good.
I know the consultants were particularly keen about Cyprus. For some reason, it sounded like they wanted to go and check it out in person, just to just to verify all the information.
We told them they are more than welcome.
Yeah. Well, now it's time for our open discussion. We just want to hear how the MAC could be serving you all better, and commentary on Seth's presentation, and any other topics that you all would like to be addressed. So open discussion now.
I'm curious, any potential topics, speakers to bring in the near future?
Yeah, well, something. Well, go on, Miran. Sorry.
Go on, Ed. Go on.
Oh, well, I was just keen to hear from anyone, that's actively developing at the moment, as to whether what the feedback you're getting from the industry is. I mean, we're although, funnily enough, with material prices, we're seeing stuff begin to soften out. So steel and things like that have come out of their peaks. Precious metals have come off their peaks. But actually, a lot of the data we're saying, I hate to sound gloomy, is pretty bad for the next 12 to 24 months. I don't know if that's similar around the world, if the sort of data that you're looking at is similar. Interested to hear comments from people on that.
It is, Ed. It is everywhere. It's not just Gibraltar or the cities that you are involved in. We are seeing this across Middle East as well as Southeast Asia.
Okay.
To give you feedback on one of our World Trade Centers, I know that Tallinn is going to redo their entire World Trade Center. They're going to be adding 15,000 square meters. And
wow.
They should have the authorization in the coming 6 months, but they're not going to start building until about 2 years because of prices of construction.
Right. Wow, that's quite interesting.
And in Massachusetts and in Northeast for sure here, the same story. We have a couple of active projects right now. Likewise, getting a lot of timeline adjustments by months and not just by weeks because of supply chain issues. We are seeing a lot more happening on the interior side now too, cabinets and just fixtures inside each unit or each space is also becoming a little bit of a challenge. The other thing I wanted to point out also is, at least in Massachusetts, and I know many other states are doing this in North America, is just the inclusion or the diversity inclusion for development RFPs, and making sure that there's a good percentage now of diversity that's reflected when going after a development project. So that's definitely a focus, especially here in Massachusetts right now, both minority organizations, women-owned businesses, and so on.
Agreed. Just on I mean, it's worth asking this as well. I mean, some of the things that we've discussed recently around work from home, and we had some good discussions in previous Macs about the sort of work from home market, the remote working market, what that's doing, and actually it's called work from anywhere now apparently. So, but I'm reading that the uptake of that is significantly less in the States, and in North America, people are actually back in the office more than they are in certain parts of Europe, and perhaps around the world as well. Is that the case? What do you know? If
that's interesting to hear. Yeah, that's interesting to hear, because I think America's pretty high on still the remote work side of things. We go into the Seaport District where World Trade Center Boston is, and it's still very quiet in terms of office usage. Now, with that being said, there's a tremendous sublease market going on right now in Boston, where companies that do have long-term leases are now subleasing, specific portions of their space out. But it's interesting. There's I think a Wall Street Journal article that came out the last couple of days called "Quiet Quitting." I'll send it around to everyone here, but it's an interesting article to read about the current workforce and their mentality about remote work and going back into the office. We're still very hybrid in our organization.
Okay.
We are back to 100% occupancy into offices.
Yeah.
In all our operations, everywhere.
I
have nobody working from home.
Yeah.
In India, in some cities, we are progressively moving, but some industries like IT, we do see still 60 to 70% of remote working. But in other industries, we're seeing that there's 100% movement of office work. So it's a combination, because IT is very large. So IT definitely is, Mumbai, Bangalore, Delhi, NCR, the metros we are seeing, it's back to work. But in some of the remote cities and other cities, tier 2 cities, we're seeing that it's work from home or hybrid being used.
Care, on that note, I just put something in the chat. Prime Minister Modi gave a big speech last week about the need and necessity for people to work from home and hybrid work. And does that have an impact in India, like on what you see with your occupancy? And
the absorption rates actually in Mumbai, Bangalore, Hyderabad is actually on a high. Compared, we are back to almost the pre-COVID times, as far as the absorption rate is concerned. Buildings are getting occupied more and more. Newer spaces are required. So I think in India, we're progressively moving ahead of hybrid or work from home.
I think
we've seen the fourth wave right now coming. But hardly people, after the booster vaccine, in fact, I hardly see people using masks or anything. Except for the public. At the airport, it's forced. At the airport, we're forced to wear masks. But other than that, I don't see anybody using any masks or anything. We're almost, like in World Trade Center, Noida, I've got 50,000 people working, and they're all back at work. But then I understand it's more of an assembly line there. They're all at work. I have a startup, which is, I've got an accelerator, which we are still doing as hybrid. So technology, yes, because of can afford to be online or cloud or based on, online. That is still where we are seeing people mostly opting for hybrid.
Okay.
Very sectoral.
And Nisa, I think when you said something important, you're absorbing office space, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's being occupied. So it's kind of, and I think that's a really important point, because that affects retail, that affects, you know, all the other ancillary things. So I think that there may be sales of of space, but it may not be occupied. And I think that's going to be another wave that's going to start to happen probably over the next 6 to 8 months. I think people will start restoring back to office a little bit more.
Interesting.
Charlie, about that?
Yes.
I've seen in June, World Trade Center Almeida Park and World Trade Center Barcelona here in Spain, and they were saying exactly that. So the occupancy in terms of square meters hasn't changed. Most of the companies remained. Almeida Park is more of big multinationals, and Barcelona, from being in the center, has smaller companies. So their occupancy is very high, but people are not back in the office. So it has an impact on all of the everything that has to do with the vendors and all of the restaurants, and because there's no consumption there, obviously, because people are not back. But because they're not back all week, so they're mostly back on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, or Wednesdays and Thursdays. Obviously, Monday and Friday, no one's here. But also because because of all of the rules linked to COVID hadn't changed really until the end of the first quarter, maybe. So people needed to wear masks still. So it was, to be fair, it was really not convenient to be working in the office. So I think in those cases, they were actually waiting for September to see if after the summer it would actually change and people will start coming back. So,
I think it's really interesting how we see these systemic sort of changes taking place, you know, particularly if you take the UK. I mean, it's the same as everywhere, but because of the pandemic, you've got obviously far less people using public transport, such as trains, but you also now have this inflationary measure, which is leading unions to say, well, hold on a minute, we need a pay rise. And obviously the train operators are saying, well, hold on a minute, we don't even have half the people on the trains anymore. So how can you get a pay rise for half the work? And you've got this strange dynamic that's occurring everywhere, where you've got a pinch from both ends. And it's not looking great.
Painful.
You know, on the delay, I'll tell you, we have, you know, on the logistics, we are almost ready for, as far as WTC Chandigarh is concerned. But it's been a delay of 6 to 8 months, where our services like the elevators, the lifts, the DG, we are not able to procure them. It's a delay of 8 months, 6 to 8 months that we are looking at. So logistics, you know, in the supply chain, we definitely have a delay in India between 6 to 8 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
Danica?
Yes, I was trying to get the secrets of, sorry. Yes, thank you, Charlie. So thank you for this great discussion. And, you know, it was very, very interesting to hear about all the trends all around the world. What I'm observing in my sub-region of Eastern and Central Europe is that more logistics space is actually needed. So the logistics space absorption is one of the trends that we would maybe can leverage throughout network. And also, of course, co-working spaces. This is an interesting trend. When it comes to the new buildings, we have here our new onboarded member, WTC Yerevan. Artaxerxes, are you still there? You want to join us? He doesn't. Yeah, I mean he's guiding large scale project in Yerevan, in the capital city. Armenia, and yes, maybe.
Hi, sorry, was it about me? Because I was on the call, muted, and I took away my and then I realized when you said Armenia, I was suspecting that, you know, that kind of this pose was kind of about.
No. Oh, sorry. Please, can
okay,
you...
Hi everyone. My name is Artaxerxes, rookie to WTCY. Officially since fall 2021, I guess. And what was the topics of what you want me to do, to introduce myself and where we stand and what is it that we want to achieve?
Because it was interesting that actually how do you develop your big real estate project there? Yeah.
Okay. Look, we are at as I said at the beginning, I'm Artaşis. Nice to meet everyone. I do have a banking and a finance background, was in the private equity. Joined this particular Armenian group that had already the idea of bringing in WTC-A to Armenia. And then we're really small, so it's only one person, so me running the whole show, but with the support of the group. Long story short, we've identified a venue in the downtown Yerevan, and we're in talks with the government because the government realized the significance of the investment and the building, so they want to co-invest with us on the real estate development part. And yes, we're now in the stage of finalizing the memorandum of understanding with the government, but at the same time, we are in stage of soliciting interest from potential consultants to conduct a feasibility study, because this is going to be a 1,000 square to 120,000 square meter type of a development, roughly a project of a size between 150 million to 100 million US, which is unprecedented by Armenian standards, because Armenia is a small country, as you may know, or some of you may know. At the same time, we're talking to certain architects that express the interest to participate. You know, these big names like Zaha Hadid and Norman Foster's, they express the interest. Yeah, we hope that we would finalize the kind of the relationship with the state by the end of the year, and the funding we would also finalize by the Q3, Q4 next year. So eventually we will start the construction 2024 onwards. But at the same time, we still want to deliver, certain small wins when it comes to the services, because it's not about the real estate, as you all know way better than I am, but it's all about also, catering for the SMEs. And I'm in a search. Actually, I've been put via Tanica and other people to talk with certain W2C cities about understanding what type of services they render. So I kind of cherry pick and see what might be feasible for Armenia in the short term to provide to the local business communities. So that was the short presentation, ladies and gentlemen. I'm open for the questions. Feel free to ask.
Good to see you again, Artaşis, and welcome to the group here.
Thanks. I understand there have been, you reached out to Eduard just a couple of minutes ago, and he forwarded the stuff to me, but he will reply to you already.
Yeah. The economic ministry will sign, right? Good.
Correct.
Good.
Great.
Well, that's excellent to have a new member to the MAC too. Welcome.
Yeah, I hope to see you in person, because I plan to attend the New York Forum.
Oh, in October, great.
We'll see you there.
Hey, Crystal, did you want to mention something about that?
Yeah, good segue. Thank you, Artaşis. That's great. And thanks, Denisa, for bringing him in. Yes, we have the October member forum coming up quickly. It will be in person as well as virtual. So for those of you who can't make it to New York City, we really would like you to attend virtually. We'll have a mix of main stage as well as workshop sessions. It's really our first chance to come back together after 3 years, not seeing each other in person. So we're looking forward to seeing you all. More details will be shared soon, but feel free to look at that link that I just put in the chat. And then we also, just briefly, I know Carlos is also on the call. We have a September event held in Mexico around logistics, as well as the Latin America regional meeting. And so, Carlos, do you want to just give a brief update on that?
Yes, Crystal, everything is set. We're having a very interesting logistics seminar dealing with topics like the logistics challenges of e-commerce, which is increasing the trans-border e-commerce around the world. We'll be dealing as well with the new concept of nearshoring, how some companies are seeking to have production somewhere near the States and not in Asia. We will have someone from the IDB, from the Inter-American Development Bank. We'll also be discussing the challenges of logistics after COVID, with the high prices of containers, disruption of global chains. And we'll be having a special session, which will be shared by Robin, on World Trade Centers and logistics centers. We have already in Mexico 3 logistics centers that are World Trade Centers branded. And that's interesting because there's an increasing demand for the brand associated with logistics. Again, we also have in the region, the World Trade Center Buenos Aires will be there. They will begin construction of the 200-meter high tower, the highest office tower in Latin America. And there is also buildings beginning to constructions in 5 different cities in the region. So the situation is quite dynamic, and it's going to be a very interesting regional meeting and a very interesting meeting on what role logistics play in the region. So that's a very short update, Crystal.
Thank you, Carlos. Thanks.
Crystal, I remember when we were doing our investigation of case study cities, we were thinking about a logistics one. Did we land on one that's kind of logistics oriented? Or maybe that's next wave.
Yes, yeah, we had a couple on the list, but we identified kind of next wave, especially as some of them are just starting out. And so we decided to kind of hold off. Hopefully 2023.
Excellent. All right, good. All right, that brings us close to our closing. Does anyone else have any more announcements or commentary that they'd like to make? And Seth, can you share your PowerPoint with us, as well as maybe a couple pieces of literature that you think are the sharpest that would be most helpful? Just get that to Crystal.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to do so. Thank you so much.
All right, and just want to thank you again for your time this morning. And now we have a friend in 35 countries.
That's right. Absolutely. Well, thank you for making the time for me, and I'm happy to share any of the materials with you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Seth.
Constitutes the end of the agenda.
Fantastic. Great. Well, thank you, Charlie, Ed, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
See you, everyone. Thanks, Charlie.